"I'll wait till dawn," she whispered. The millionaire suddenly knew she might not make it. The city shimmered like a jewel under the midnight sky. Lights sparkled from towers, reflecting in the river that cut through the heart of the metropolis. From a distance it looked serene, almost peaceful. But those who knew the city's secrets, its hidden power, its whispers of danger, understood that darkness lay beneath every glittering surface. In one of the tallest towers, a gala was underway. Guests in silk and velvet moved gracefully through the grand hall, champagne glasses in hand, laughter ringing through the gilded space. Every surface shone under the crystal chandeliers, but no light could touch the man standing near the massive windows, staring at the city below. He was known to the world as Alexander Carrington, the millionaire, the man who controlled industries, influenced politics, and held power like a king without a crown. But even kings could be haunted. Tonight, Alexander's dark eyes reflected more than the city's lights. They mirrored a restless heart, a mind that had grown accustomed to controlling everything, yet never to feeling. A faint disturbance rippled through the crowd, almost unnoticed. It was subtle, like a gust of wind passing through the candles, making the flames shiver. Then she appeared. Her entrance was quiet, almost accidental, yet it made the room feel smaller, as if the walls had shifted to draw attention toward her. She was not dressed for wealth or power. Her gown was simple, pale as moonlight, her hair loose and untouched by adornment. Her presence carried fragility, yet beneath it, a fierce light shone. Alexander's gaze locked on her instantly. He did not know why, but something about her stirred a long-buried instinct. A warning whispered in the recesses of his mind. This woman was extraordinary, and she was in danger. She moved slowly, carefully, almost as if she feared the world would crush her if she hurried. Then she paused a few steps from him, eyes meeting his with a calm that was almost defiant. And she whispered, so softly that no one else could hear, "I'll wait till dawn." The words, fragile as a butterfly's wing, hit Alexander with a force he could not resist. The room, the music, the laughter, all fell away. He only saw her, only heard her. A cold shiver ran down his spine. She might not make it, he realized, and the thought rooted him in place. The gala continued around them, oblivious to the silent warning, but Alexander could not move. He studied her face, the slight pallor of her skin, the way her lips pressed together, the tension in her delicate hands. Something was wrong, and she carried it like a secret burden. He took a careful step forward. The crowd seemed to part instinctively, though no one else noticed. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying an authority that could command any room. She glanced at him briefly, a flicker of something, fear perhaps, or recognition, passing through her eyes. Then she shook her head. "I have to wait," she said, repeating her cryptic words, "till dawn." Alexander's instinct screamed at him to act. He wanted to gather her into his arms, shield her from whatever shadow threatened her. But he restrained himself. He was a man of control, and yet for the first time in many years, control slipped through his fingers like water. Before he could speak again, the first signs of her trouble appeared. She swayed slightly, almost imperceptibly, and Alexander was across the room in 2 strides, steadying her. Her body was light, almost weightless, yet it carried a weakness that alarmed him. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice taut with concern. She shook her head, refusing to answer, though her lips quivered as if she wanted to speak. I can't stay long," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm not strong enough." Alexander's heart constricted. He had faced countless battles in the business world, negotiated deals that bent nations, and stared down rivals who threatened his empire. But this was different. This was human fragility, life and death mingled with something he did not yet understand. "Then let me help you," he said firmly, his hand still lightly resting on her arm. "Whatever this is, you don't have to face it alone." She looked at him then fully, and for a moment her eyes glistened with something unspoken, fear, trust, perhaps even hope. "You don't know what it is," she said softly. "And I can't let anyone get close. Not yet." Alexander's jaw tightened. He had spent a lifetime controlling outcomes, keeping people at a distance, building walls that could never be breached. And yet here was a woman who, without knowing it, had dismantled every one of them with a single whispered sentence. The gala's music swelled, a lilting waltz, but neither of them noticed. Alexander guided her gently toward a quieter corner, where the shadows of the room could conceal their presence. He studied her again, every detail etched into his memory. The faint tremor in her hands, the sharpness of her gaze, the way she held herself upright despite evident weakness. She was a paradox, delicate yet defiant, fragile yet fiercely alive. "Tell me your name," he demanded softly, refusing to let the mystery go unchallenged. "Isla," she said, a single word, but it carried weight, like a secret kept too long. Alexander repeated it silently. Isla. He did not know why the name resonated in him, but it did. Deep within a part of himself he had long abandoned, hope. Then came the first true sign of danger. A shadow flickered across the room, almost at the edge of perception, and Alexander's instincts flared. He had always trusted his instincts. They had saved him more times than he could count. He looked around. The crowd continued obliviously, but the air had shifted. A chill ran through the room. Something unnatural was near. Isla's hand twitched in his grip. She drew in a sharp breath, and for the first time Alexander saw panic in her eyes. "We need to leave," he said, his tone no longer asking. It was a command, a promise, and a shield. Isla hesitated. Then, without another word, she allowed him to guide her through the hidden corridors behind the grand hall. The walls of the tower whispered secrets, old stones, cold to the touch, echoing with the weight of power and shadow. Alexander kept a careful watch, his senses stretched, every nerve alert. Finally, they reached the private elevator that led to his hidden suite. As the doors closed, the noise of the gala faded, replaced by the hum of machinery and the soft echo of their footsteps. Alexander let go of her arm for a moment to study her fully. Isla looked smaller here, vulnerable, yet the faint glow in her eyes hinted at strength she was unwilling to surrender. "You should rest," he said. "You're not safe out there." "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet. The danger, it's tied to me. If I stay hidden, maybe." Her voice trailed off. Alexander sensed the unfinished thought, the fear of a fate she could not yet face. The suite was vast, luxurious, a place few had seen, but Alexander ignored the opulence. He led her to a chaise by the window, pulling her gently down, watching every motion. Isla's breaths came shallow, rapid, betraying the effort it took to remain upright. "I don't understand," he admitted, unusually vulnerable. "What is happening to you? Why tonight?" She shook her head, fragile tears glinting in the pale moonlight. "I wish I could explain, but I don't have time. If I fail—" Her voice broke, leaving the threat unspoken but heavy in the air. Alexander's hands tightened around hers. "I don't care what it is. I'll protect you. No matter the cost." For a long moment, they simply held each other's gaze. Shadows danced across the walls, the city beyond unaware of the storm that had quietly settled in this tower suite. Something unspoken passed between them, a bond forged in urgency, in fear, in the recognition of mortality. Then a sudden movement in the shadows caught Alexander's attention. A faint ripple in the corner of the room, like a shadow stretching where it should not. He rose, instinct sharp. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low but commanding. Isla nodded, fear and trust mingling in her expression. Alexander moved toward the corner, senses straining. But when he arrived, nothing was there. The shadows seemed to retreat, leaving only an eerie chill behind. He returned to Isla, exhaling sharply. "Whatever it is," he murmured, "it won't touch you, not while I'm here." Her lips trembled and she whispered almost inaudibly, "I'll wait till dawn." Alexander's heart tightened again. Dawn, the turning of night into day, light overcoming darkness. If she survived until then, she might be safe. But if not, the thought was unbearable. He pulled her close, determined to remain awake with her through the long hours of the night, the city outside gleaming and indifferent. Somewhere in the shadows, a danger waited. But Alexander Carrington, the man who had controlled everything, had finally found something he could not let go, a woman whose life and soul had become his responsibility, whose whispered promise had shattered his solitude. And so the night stretched ahead, long, uncertain, and fraught with peril. Alexander knew one thing with absolute clarity: he would not let her vanish before dawn. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the fragile battle unfolding in the heart of a tower where wealth, power, and shadows converged. Inside, Alexander and Isla faced the unknown together, the first threads of trust, longing, and danger binding them in a tapestry of fate that neither could escape. The night had begun, and nothing would be the same again. The night deepened, and the city outside Alexander Carrington's suite seemed oblivious to the quiet storm within. Every street glimmered with light, yet inside, shadows clung to the corners of the room, as if they knew the danger that stalked the woman he had vowed to protect. Isla sat curled on the chaise, her hands wrapped around her knees. Her pale gown shimmered faintly in the moonlight, but it could not hide the exhaustion etched across her face. Alexander watched her from across the room, a careful distance maintained, yet his gaze never left her. Every shallow breath, every tremor of her fingers drew him closer, even as he struggled to maintain the control he had always prized. "I need to understand," he said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low but firm, the kind that had commanded boardrooms and silenced entire rooms with a single word. "What is happening to you, Isla? Why must you wait till dawn?" She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting fear, defiance, and something he could not yet name. "It's not simple," she said. "It's something I can't explain fully. It's tied to my family, to a curse, too." She stopped, swallowing. "If I survive the night, I might have a chance to fight it. But if I fail," her voice faltered. Alexander stepped closer, closing the distance, until the space between them seemed impossibly small. "You won't fail," he said firmly. "Whatever it is, whatever threat there is, I will not let it touch you, not while I'm here." She studied him, the faintest trace of a smile crossing her lips, though her fear did not fade. "You don't even know what you're promising," she whispered. "I know enough," he replied. "I know enough to know I can't let you be alone. Not tonight." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken fears and a shared awareness of the danger lurking just beyond their fragile sanctuary. Then, without warning, Isla's body shivered violently. Alexander's hand shot out instinctively, steadying her, anchoring her to reality. "It's coming," she whispered, barely audible. "The shadow, it's coming for me." Alexander's pulse quickened. He had suspected something supernatural in the air, something intangible and menacing. Now it confirmed itself. He could feel it in the cold that slithered along the floorboards, in the faint rustling of shadows that moved where no light could reach. "Stay close to me," he ordered, his voice sharp but calm. "Do not move from this room." Isla nodded, her lips pressed tightly together, and he could see the effort it took for her to remain upright. He guided her to a more secure position near the center of the room, away from the walls where the shadows seemed hungriest. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to confront the unseen enemy, yet he hesitated. He needed to protect her, but reckless action could endanger her further. Minutes stretched into hours, the night seeming to hold its breath. Alexander moved with quiet precision, ensuring doors were locked, windows sealed, and the environment controlled. He had always been a man of meticulous planning, but the unpredictable threat outside his control unsettled him more than any financial crisis ever had. Finally, he broke the silence. "Tell me everything you can, no matter how small, how strange, how impossible it seems. I need to know what we're facing." Isla drew in a trembling breath. "It's been with my family for generations," she began. "A curse or a shadow that follows." It hunts those who are bound to it, testing them, feeding on fear, on doubt. Some survive, most don't. I've lived with it, trying to ignore it, trying to hide. But tonight it's stronger. Alexander's mind raced, piecing together fragments of her words. A curse, a shadow, a test of courage and endurance. Everything about her presence, the subtle tremors, the whispered warnings, all pointed to something beyond mortal understanding. I don't care if it's impossible, he said firmly. I will face it with you, every step. She studied him then, her gaze searching, as if trying to measure his sincerity. You don't know what you're offering, she said softly, almost mournfully. It could destroy you, Alexander. I don't care, he said. The words came easily, without hesitation, but they carried the weight of every unspoken fear, every guarded emotion he had long buried. Not if it means keeping you alive. The room fell into a tense quiet again. Shadows crept along the walls, curling like smoke, responding to some invisible command. Alexander could feel the air grow colder, heavier, as if the night itself were aware of their defiance. He did not flinch. He would not allow fear to dictate his actions, not when the woman before him was fragile yet unbroken. Then came the first clear sign of the shadow's intent. A faint movement, subtle yet deliberate, traced along the far corner of the room. Alexander's eyes narrowed. His instincts flared. This was no ordinary threat. It was intelligent, patient, and cruel. Stay behind me, he ordered. He moved deliberately, stepping between Isla and the shifting darkness. The shadows seemed to hesitate, recognizing his presence, testing his will. Alexander, Isla's voice was tight, trembling. It knows you're here. That's why she stopped, her eyes widening in terror. Before he could respond, the shadow surged forward, twisting and coiling like living smoke. Alexander reacted instinctively, moving to shield her, and for a moment the room seemed to dissolve into a swirl of darkness and cold. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the shadow receded, retreating to the far corners. Alexander exhaled, his heart pounding, but his grip on Isla did not loosen. It will not touch you, he said again, though his voice was firmer this time. I swear it. Isla's knees trembled as she sank to the floor, leaning against him for support. Alexander helped her up, guiding her to the chaise once more. The moonlight caught her face, revealing the pale shimmer of fear mixed with determination. You're different, she whispered finally, her voice barely audible over the quiet thrum of tension in the room. Most people would run, most people wouldn't even notice, but you, she trailed off, her eyes glimmering. You care, you actually care. Alexander's jaw tightened. I've spent my life controlling things I could manage, he said softly, but you're something I cannot control. And I don't want to. She looked at him then fully, as if seeing him in a way no one else ever had. The connection between them grew, subtle yet undeniable, a fragile bridge of trust, hope, and unspoken longing. Hours passed, the night stretching on, the threat lurking at the edges of perception. Alexander kept Isla close, his presence a steady anchor in the shifting sea of shadows. Occasionally she would shiver, whispering her fears, and he would respond with gentle reassurance, a touch, a hand lightly resting on hers. At some point, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a fitful sleep, her head resting against his shoulder. Alexander watched over her, every muscle tense, every sense alert. The shadows moved quietly, but he did not falter. He had promised to protect her, and promises were not to be broken. As the night wore on, Alexander allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He had never believed in fate, in destiny, in the kind of connection that could bind two souls so completely. Yet here in the quiet darkness of his suite, with a woman whose life hung by the thinnest thread, he felt it, an unspoken bond, fragile but powerful, forming between them. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper brushed against the edges of his consciousness. Alexander's eyes snapped open. The shadows were stirring again, moving faster this time, drawn by some unseen command. The air grew colder, sharper, and the sense of menace intensified. Isla stirred in her sleep, murmuring something Alexander could not hear. He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Wake up," he whispered gently. "You're not alone, I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his gaze. For a moment fear flickered, but then something else, trust, perhaps even hope, replaced it. "It's stronger now," she said softly. "I can feel it closing in." Alexander's fists clenched. "Then we will face it," he said firmly. "Together." The shadows shivered, as if aware of their resolve, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the city slept on, unaware of the fragile battle unfolding in a quiet suite high above the streets. Alexander and Isla, bound by circumstance, fear, and a growing connection, prepared to face the night together. And somewhere deep in the darkness, the shadow paused, sensing their defiance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The night had deepened into something almost eternal. The city below, glittering with lights and life, seemed unaware of the storm that lingered in the quiet tower suite. Shadows stretched long and restless across the walls, curling like smoke, coiling as if alive, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Alexander Carrington had never felt more alert, more tense. Every muscle in his body was taut with the need to protect, to act, to control what he could not yet understand. Isla sat on the edge of the chaise, pale and trembling, but her eyes burned with defiance. She had fought the shadow her entire life, hidden it, ignored it, but tonight it had come close, too close. She glanced at Alexander, her voice low and trembling. I can't hide it anymore," she whispered. "I can feel it. It's stronger now than ever. I don't know if I'll last until dawn." Alexander moved to stand in front of her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You will," he said firmly. "Whatever this shadow is, whatever curse follows you, it will not take you tonight. I promise." She looked at him, and for a moment the fear in her eyes faltered, replaced by something like wonder. Why do you care?" she asked softly. "No one has ever cared like this. Not really." Alexander's jaw tightened. He had built walls around his heart for decades, surrounding himself with power, control, and cold certainty. Yet here she was, a fragile, defiant woman, breaking every barrier he had erected. "Because you matter," he said simply, the words heavy with sincerity. "Because I can't let you be alone, not when the night is this dark, not when the danger is real." Her eyes softened, a trace of vulnerability showing through the fear. I've never had anyone stand like this for me, not like this." Alexander's gaze never wavered. "Then trust me now," he said. "Trust me to stay, trust me to fight, trust me to protect you." The room grew colder suddenly, a shiver crawling along the walls, moving toward them as though drawn by their unspoken bond. The shadows in the far corners twisted, elongating into forms that seemed almost human in shape, yet wrong, unnatural, impossible. Alexander stepped closer to Isla, placing himself between her and the advancing darkness. "Stay behind me," he ordered. His voice was steady, commanding, and there was no room for hesitation. The shadow seemed to hesitate, sensing his resolve. But the pause was brief. It surged forward, faster this time, reaching across the room with a blackness that seemed to drain the warmth from the air. Alexander held his ground, his hands raised instinctively, though he had no weapons, no magic, only his will and determination. Isla gripped his arm tightly, her nails digging lightly into his sleeve. Fear shone in her eyes, but she did not falter. Alexander sensed her courage, fragile yet undeniable, and it strengthened him. Together they faced the darkness. "You're not taking her," Alexander said firmly, his voice ringing with authority. "Not tonight, not ever." The shadow recoiled as if his words had struck it, and for a moment it seemed uncertain. But it was patient, cunning, and Alexander knew it would return. He turned to Isla, his expression softening. "I need to know everything you can tell me," he said. "No detail is too small. No memory is too faint. We face this together now." Isla took a trembling breath, her hands brushing against his. "It started long before me," she said. "My family, we were cursed generations ago. The shadow follows those who carry our blood, testing them, feeding on doubt, fear, and weakness. Some survive, some don't. I've always tried to hide it, to live in the light. But the night always finds us." Alexander listened, every word sharpening his resolve. "Then we fight in the night, together." Her lips trembled, a faint smile ghosting across her face. "I've never had someone fight with me," she admitted. "Not like this." "And you never will again," Alexander replied firmly. "I will not let you face it alone." The shadows began to swirl again, their movement faster, more aggressive. Alexander stepped closer to Isla, his presence a shield, his determination an invisible barrier against the darkness. He could feel the air grow heavier, colder, the very essence of fear pressing in from every corner. "You must rest," he said softly, guiding her back to the chaise. "You need strength. I will keep the shadows at bay." Isla's gaze met his, searching, questioning. "I don't want to be weak," she whispered. "You are not weak," Alexander replied. "Weakness is only the absence of protection, and I will protect you." She allowed him to help her lie back, resting her head against the soft cushions. Alexander remained standing, vigilant, every sense alert. The room seemed to pulse with the shadow's presence, as if it were aware of their bond, aware that it could not touch her while he stood so resolute. Hours passed. Isla's breathing grew steadier as exhaustion claimed her, and Alexander used the time to think, to plan. The shadow was intelligent, relentless, patient. It would test them, perhaps until dawn, seeking a moment of weakness. But Alexander had faced countless challenges in his life. This one was different, more personal, more immediate, but he would not fail. Finally, Isla stirred, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I dreamt of it," she whispered. "The shadow, it wants me to fail. It showed me things. Horrible things, if I give in, if I falter." Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Alexander knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said. "You will not give in. You will not falter. Not tonight. I will stand with you, every step, every moment, until the dawn comes." Her eyes filled with tears, a mixture of fear and relief. "You really mean it?" "Every word," he said firmly. "I am not leaving your side. Not now, not ever." For a moment silence filled the room, heavy with tension and the unspoken truths of their hearts. Then Isla spoke again, softer this time. "Alexander, I think I'm beginning to trust you, not just with my safety but with myself." His chest tightened. Trust was not something he gave lightly. He had guarded it, locked it away behind walls of wealth and power. And yet here was a woman who had entered his life, fragile yet unbroken, and she had begun to unlock it. "You can trust me," he said. "Completely. I will not betray it." The shadows seemed to stir again, as if aware of the growing bond between them. Alexander's instincts screamed that the night was not over, that the shadow would strike again. He stood, alert, every sense focused, prepared to face whatever came. Then the unexpected happened. A voice, soft but unmistakable, echoed through the room, not from any human source but from the shadows themselves. "You cannot protect her," it hissed, cold and cruel. "She belongs to the night." Alexander's jaw tightened. "She belongs to no one," he said firmly. "Least of all you." The shadows pulsed with darkness, twisting and writhing as if alive. Alexander moved closer to Isla, his presence a shield, his determination a barrier. He could feel the cold press against his skin, the weight of the darkness, the threat that sought to consume her. "Alexander," Isla's voice trembled, but she did not pull away. Instead, she reached for his hand, drawing strength from his presence. I trust you. I believe you." His heart tightened. The bond between them was growing stronger, a tether of hope, courage, and unspoken longing. The shadow recoiled slightly, sensing that its power over her was waning, but it was not defeated, not yet. The night seemed endless, the darkness pressing closer, testing them, challenging them. Alexander remained steadfast, unwavering, a silent sentinel against the encroaching terror. Isla's hands were in his, her strength and courage mingling with his own. Together they formed a line of resistance, fragile yet unbroken. And then, as the first hints of dawn approached, painting the city in pale light, the shadow surged one final time, more powerful than before, desperate, angry. It reached for Isla, seeking to claim her. Alexander moved with a speed and precision born of desperation and love. He stepped in front of her, arms outstretched, a barrier of will against the darkness. "Not tonight," he said firmly. "Not while I breathe, not while I stand. You will not touch her." The shadow recoiled, hissing, writhing, and then, as the first light of dawn touched the windows, it dissipated, retreating into the corners, leaving only the cold air behind. Isla sank to the floor, exhausted, leaning against Alexander. I thought I might not make it," she whispered. "You did," Alexander said softly, lifting her gently. "And you will. We face it together, always." Her eyes met his, filled with gratitude, trust, and something deeper, unspoken but undeniable. For the first time in her life, Isla felt safe. And Alexander, for the first time in many years, he felt something he had thought impossible: hope. The night was over, but the memory lingered, the fear, the struggle, the bond that had formed in the shadows. They had survived together, and they had changed. The dawn had not only saved her life, but had begun to awaken something in both of them, something stronger than fear, stronger than shadows, stronger than the darkness of the world outside. The first rays of dawn slipped through the tall windows of Alexander Carrington's suite, casting long, golden streaks across the marble floor. The city outside was waking, oblivious to the night's hidden battles, to the shadows that had tested courage, love, and will in a silent struggle high above the streets. Inside, Alexander sat near Isla, watching her carefully. She had survived the shadow's assault, but exhaustion still clung to her like a second skin. Her pale hands rested in his, and her breathing, though steadier, was still fragile. Every instinct he had screamed that her ordeal was not over. "You should not have stayed awake with me," Isla whispered, her voice weak but steady. "You could have slept, and—" "I could not sleep," Alexander interrupted gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not when you were in danger. Not when I didn't know if you would make it through the night." She looked up at him, her eyes full of trust, fear, and a flicker of something more, something deeper. "I never thought anyone would fight for me like this," she admitted. "Not just to keep me alive, but to really stand with me in every way." Alexander's gaze softened and he lowered his voice. "You do not have to face anything alone, Isla, not anymore." A silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken confessions. Outside, the city's morning hum began, but inside, the suite remained a haven, a quiet cocoon where two souls could begin to heal, to understand, to connect. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the room drew Alexander's attention. The shadows, remnants of the night's menace, seemed restless. A low, whispering hiss echoed faintly, as if the darkness itself resented their survival. "It's not gone," Isla said softly, shivering. "It waits, always." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Then we end it. Tonight it tests you. Tomorrow it will find nothing. We will face it together." Her fingers tightened in his hand. "I don't know if I have the strength." "You have more strength than you know," he said. "And I will lend you mine. We are not alone anymore." As if in answer, the shadows shifted, growing darker, more deliberate, forming shapes that were vaguely human yet terrifyingly unnatural. The air in the suite grew cold, a chill that burned along the skin, and Alexander stepped forward, placing himself fully in front of Isla. "You will not touch her," he said firmly, every word deliberate, every heartbeat filled with resolve. "Not now, not ever." The shadows recoiled slightly, but their malice was clear. They had been patient, waiting for the slightest hesitation, the faintest flicker of fear. Tonight, Alexander had none. His heart, which had been cold and distant for so long, now burned with purpose. His will was as strong as steel, anchored in his desire to protect the woman who had become the center of his world. "Alexander," Isla whispered, her voice almost a prayer. "If it takes you, it will not," he interrupted, taking her hands in his. "I will not fail, not while you live, not while I breathe." The shadows surged, a final desperate assault, twisting and writhing, filling the room with a palpable sense of dread. Alexander's eyes narrowed. He could feel the darkness reaching, testing, probing. But it would find no weakness, no doubt, no fear strong enough to divide them. He took a deep breath, centering himself, and then moved with purpose. Step by step, he approached the source of the shadows, his hands held out as if to command the darkness itself. The shapes recoiled, twisting, shrinking, but still they lingered, unwilling to vanish completely. "Leave her," he commanded, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to ripple through the air. "She is not yours. She belongs to no one but herself and those who love her." The room seemed to pulse with tension. The shadows writhed violently, as if testing his resolve one last time. But Alexander did not falter, not even for a moment. Every fear, every hesitation, every guarded wall he had built around his heart fell away. He was fully present, fully committed, fully alive in this fight. And then something extraordinary happened. Isla, pale and trembling, raised her hands, as if sensing the moment, as if willing herself to act. I am not afraid," she whispered. Her voice, though soft, carried power, an unyielding light that the darkness could not ignore. Alexander looked at her in awe. She was fragile, yes, but the courage radiating from her now was undeniable. Together, they were a force the shadows could not conquer. He stepped closer, their hands joining, a single line of strength, determination, and trust against the encroaching darkness. The shadows hissed, recoiled, twisted, and finally dissipated. The room fell silent, cold air replaced by stillness, the oppressive weight of menace lifted. Dawn's light filtered fully into the suite, bathing everything in warm gold. The battle, it seemed, had ended. Alexander sank to his knees beside Isla, still holding her hands. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." She leaned against him, exhaustion and relief mingling in her expression. "We survived," she said softly, "together." For the first time in her life, Isla felt a peace she had never known. The shadow, the curse, the threat that had haunted generations of her family, it was broken, or at least kept at bay. And she had survived not by hiding or fleeing, but by facing it with Alexander by her side. He lifted her gently, holding her close. "You are stronger than you think," he said, his voice low and intimate. "You have always been stronger than you know, and now you are free to live your life without fear." Her lips trembled into a faint smile. "And you," she whispered, "will you still protect me?" Alexander chuckled softly, a sound rare and warm. "I will protect you," he said, "but you don't need me to fight for you anymore. You need someone who stands with you as an equal, and I want to be that person." Isla's eyes widened slightly, hope and something deeper shining in her gaze. "An equal." "Yes," he said firmly. "Equal in courage, equal in heart, equal in whatever comes next." They sat together in silence, the first light of day spilling across the room, touching their faces with warmth. Outside, the city was waking, oblivious to the night's battles, oblivious to the bond that had formed above its streets. But inside, Alexander and Isla understood something profound. They had faced darkness, survived it, and found in each other a courage, trust, and love that could not be broken. Isla leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft. "I never imagined I could feel safe or loved like this." Alexander held her close, brushing her hair gently. "You deserve it," he said, "and you will have it. As long as I live, I will be here, not to control, not to shield, but to stand with you, always." Her lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "Always," she echoed. The city outside glimmered in the morning sun, bright and unaware. But in the suite, high above, two hearts beat together, steady and unafraid. They had faced the shadows, faced fear, and emerged stronger, changed, bound not by circumstance alone, but by trust, courage, and love. As dawn fully broke, Alexander held Isla close, feeling the weight of the night lift from them both. The danger had passed for now. But the bond forged in darkness would remain unbroken and unyielding. And somewhere deep in the shadows, a faint whisper lingered, almost respectful, almost cautious. This is not the end, but they are ready. Alexander and Isla remained together, silent but united, hearts tethered by shared courage and unspoken promises. The dawn had arrived, yet their story, their connection, had only just begun.